Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes is a rather... Why does this keep happening? Tell you what, I'll just remove this, then it should be fine. There we go. Okay, Thomas Hobbes, rather stern-looking guy, and his political philosophy is arguably equally stern. As you can see from the slide, he was born in 1588 and passed away in 1679. Now, the interesting thing about Hobbes is that he was born in a period where England was experiencing enormous political turmoil. At the time that Hobbes wrote his most influential and famous work, that is the Leviathan, the English Civil War was going on, which continued from 1642 till 1651. The background to the English Civil War is that over a long period of time, owing to reforms that the Tudor dynasty itself undertook, Parliament had been becoming stronger and stronger. And the reason why Parliament was becoming stronger was because the class that was represented in Parliament was becoming richer and more powerful and stronger. And that class, of course, was not the class of landowners or feudal lords, but was the class of urban merchants and so on. What we later referred to in the French language as the bourgeoisie. Initially, the king made the parliament in order to get taxes from these merchants who had acquired this new wealth. He wanted to fight the French, etc. So he made a parliament, which was a House of Commons. He called it a House of Commons. And the purpose of the House of Commons was to basically provide him money. He wanted to tax the merchants. But as the House of Commons began to pay taxes, it also began to have more and more influence over the monarchy itself. Of course, in the time of Henry VIII, the Church of England and England as a whole had already separated from the Catholic Church over the question of his marriage to Anne Boleyn and so on. Many of you may have read about that or heard about it at least. And so now the king himself was the head of the Church of England as well as the supreme monarch, etc. They had already broken from the Roman Catholic Church and so on. And Parliament had been exercising more and more power. By the 17th century, Parliament becomes strong enough such that a series of conflicts take place between the parliamentarians, the House of Commons, and the royalists. They went through, as you can see, three particular wars. The first one was in 1642 to 1646, and then the second one was in 1648 to 1649, and finally the last one was from 1649 to 1651. And finally, after these wars, Parliament won these wars, and by 1651, finally, they won these wars, and the king was, Charles I was executed, and his son was sent into exile, that's Charles II. And this is when really England transforms from a monarchy into a constitutional country, although it still takes a long time between 1651 till finally the glorious revolution of 1688, when parliamentary supremacy comes to be legally recognized. But nonetheless, this is the process through which the English parliamentary system was created. It was a process through which the merchant class began to rise up, the middle classes of English society who did not belong to landed property. They began to assert more and more influence, and by successive revolts, they fought the royalists, the king, etc., overthrew the king, established a commonwealth of England. Later, right after that, they also established a protectorate, etc., etc. It went back and forth. Charles II came back, in fact, with the Scottish army and so on, English and Scottish army, and he fought the parliamentarians and he won. And one of the conditions of his coming back to the throne was that he had the remains of Oliver Cromwell exhumed and hanged his skeleton in front of in front of Buckingham Palace and that sort of thing. But nonetheless, the point was that, but finally anyway, by 1688, both the royalists and the parliamentarians, they reach a compromise, they reach an agreement and a settlement. And the settlement is that the House of Lords will make the policy and the king will be the titular head of the state. but or the queen, the monarchy, etc., but will not really run the country as such. So that arrangement, as you know, has lasted till the 21st century now. It's really the Parliament, the House of Commons that runs England, and yet the Queen is still there and the monarchy is still there and so on. Okay? So ये वो period था English Civil War का when Thomas Hobbes started writing. Now what he saw at the time that he was writing was chaos and anarchy. There was a civil war, as I told you, going on, and it was a pretty brutal civil war. So he saw a lot of chaos and anarchy, he saw a lot of death and destruction, and he was distraught by this death and destruction. He thought at that time you couldn't really have the hindsight of the 2020 hindsight of history that we today have. So he couldn't possibly have seen how this would evolve and develop. At the time he thought this is just anarchy and chaos and trouble and nothing good is really coming out of this, etc., etc. So he really wanted to create a political philosophy that would bring back order. There would not be a civil war anymore, there would be order, there would be law and order, and so on. So these are some of the ideas that he explicated in his time. But the other very big influence on Thomas Hobbes, and the reason arguably why, he makes a very different argument here. It's the form of the argument that we are more interested in rather than the conclusions. Because as you can see, the entire form of the argument has now undergone a very dramatic and big change. He's no longer arguing from religious convictions. He is no longer arguing even from ethical convictions. Machiavelli has changed all of that anyway. But he is now arguing from very materialist premises. And materialism, in particular in its deistic form, which is the view that although God exists, God doesn't really interfere in any way with the world. The world operates according to its own laws and according to its own natural laws and social laws and so on. So this deistic doctrine had a very big influence, not only on the French, but also on the English. And Thomas Hobbes in particular believed that there are no incorporeal substances. So what he believes is that there's no such thing that is not made of matter. All things, including human thoughts, and even God, heaven and hell, are corporeal matter in motion. They are made of actual substances. Today we don't have this conception anymore, particularly amongst Muslims. We don't conceive of God, most of us I think, don't conceive of God as a physical being. But just as we don't conceive of the soul as having any physical form, or you can't touch the soul, right? So a lot of us consider God to be as light is. In fact, in Sufism, that's a very common metaphor. In Neoplatonic thought, that's a very common metaphor. But his view was quite different from what the church's view was as well. So he believed everything was made of matter. Our thoughts are made of matter. Well, that's not too difficult to prove because our thoughts are, after all, the activity of the material substance of our brain. He thought everything was made of matter. And life itself is but the motion of limbs, like automata. Automata was a little machine that the French really liked to build. It was a little doll that the French really liked to build with levers and pulleys, etc. And you would wind it up and it would do all sorts of interesting things. Like you wind up वो जो बच्चों का खिलौना होता है जिसमें वो nursery rhyme बनती है. So an automata could actually do things. In fact, there were so many very sophisticated automata, one of which could even write a letter. Of course, it would write the same letter every time, but it would actually, there was a person with a pen that they would dip the pen in the ink and then they would write a letter. So very sophisticated things. So when he saw that, he felt that human beings are also like automata, just more sophisticated than they are. This is not a conception that's hard for us to imagine today, given all the science fiction movies that we have on artificial intelligence and how robots take over the world, whether it's Terminator or something else. It's not difficult for us to imagine that an artificial thing could be life, or that life could be just made up of various physical processes. But for his time period, the 17th century, this was quite a radical idea, you can imagine. The heart, he says, is but a spring, and the entire body he likens to various mechanisms. This is why we also refer to Hobbes's philosophical views as mechanistic materialism, because he believed everything was basically a machine, a more or less sophisticated machine. Animals, humans, everything worked as a machine, worked as an automata. And what about the state itself? Well, he thought the state itself is like an artificial man. The sovereign is an artificial soul. The magistrates are artificial joints. The rewards and punishments are its nerves. Wealth and riches are its strength. People's safety is its business. Counselors are its memory. Equity and laws are its reason and will. Concord is its health. Sedition is its sickness. Civil war is its death. So just as the body functions, as a mechanism, politics also, he believed, function as a mechanism. And you had all these. So he's giving you a metaphor. He doesn't actually believe, that this is, but it's a metaphor to understand. It's very Machiavellian in that sense. There's a metaphor for us to understand, not Machiavellian in the evil sense, but Machiavellian in the sense that we understand politics to be a mechanism, and you have to understand that mechanism in order to intervene in politics in a way that would be beneficial to society. Right. Now Hobbes comes up with this concept of the state of nature. He says if there was no politics, if there was no state, if you all lived in nature, let's say, there was no government, there was no state, how would we live? What is the natural condition of mankind? So he had a very negative appraisal कि अगर रियासत नहीं होगी, अगर हुकूमत नहीं होगी, अगर कानून नहीं होगा, तो हम क्या कुछ कर रहे होंगे? वो कहता है हम बहुत ही बुरी जिंदगी गुजार रहे हैं. वो कैसे वैसे कहता है कि nature has made men equal. This is quite a radical assumption because you understand that writing at the time that he's writing, people did not believe that nature had made men equal. If you recall, even Plato was saying nature has not made men equal. Some are brainy and some are courageous and others are just workers and yet others are slaves. So this is number one, this is a big departure from the view. And of course even in religious philosophy, slavery continued to be justified, whether it was Christianity or even Islam or other religions. They continue to have slavery, as you know. And moreover, it was always believed that some men were superior to other men, whether racially or in terms of religion or in terms of ethnicity, that man was superior to woman. That was a very common idea, etc., for many, many centuries. But he says, nature has made men equal. The weakest has strength enough to kill the strongest. Even if you're physically less strong than the other person, you have enough strength that you can kill another person. There is even greater equality in the faculties of the mind. Prudence is but experience, which equal time equally bestows on all men in those things they equally apply themselves onto. An amazing idea. So the idea here is कि हर बंदे का जो दिमाग है, unless of course you're born with some deformity or some defect or whatever, some genetic defect, but आम लोगों में, he says, हर बंदे का दिमाग बराबर का potential रखता है. The only question is whether you applied that brain or not, whether you use that brain or not. It's like your muscles, your biceps or your legs or whatever. The more you use them, the stronger they become. When you're all born, you're probably all pretty much equally weak, right? But the person that becomes a sportsman is a person that's just been out in the field and just been using his body and is, developing his strength so much. The good footballer is a good footballer only because he bloody practices all day and night. The good computer programmer is a good computer programmer because he spent hours and hours practicing it. Nothing is impossible for you to achieve, he's telling you. If you wanted to be Mozart, you could have been Mozart, but you'd have to start at the age of 5 and practice 8 hours a day. And when you completed 10,000 hours of your practice, then you'd be Mozart, you'd be incredible. Nobody could beat you. It's all about practice. Even learning, etc. Teaching, learning new things. It's all about repetition and practice. Here's an interesting idea. In social sciences today, we like to talk about critical thinking, yes? जब आप HSS की classes लेते हैं, सारे teachers आपको कहते हैं critical thinking, रटा ना मारो, कहते हैं ना, हर teacher ही कहता है आपको. मगर frankly speaking, जब आप repeat करते हैं किसी चीज़ को, चाहे आप उसको 1 दूनी 2 दूनी 4 करके repeat करें, किसी ने इस तरह पहाड़े सीखे थे? नहीं, किसी ने. अच्छा, जब हम छोटे होते थे ना, तो हम गा के इस तरह पहाड़े सीखते थे. 1 दूनी 2 दूनी 4, 1 into 2 is 2 and 2 into 2 is 4, etc., etc. तो वो पहाड़े मुझे आज तक याद है, as you can clearly see. मुझे भूलते ही नहीं, and it laid a very strong foundation for mental mathematics. It was very easy to do mathematics if you know the tables by heart. So repetition does play a very important role. So for example, I'm a musician, I love to play music. When I practice a scale, I have to practice that scale, 1,000 times. And then once I practice it so many times, it becomes just natural. Then I don't even have to think before playing it. So if you want to be good at something, you have to practice. What do you want to be good at? Okay. What do you want to be good at?
Public speaking.
Public speaking? Okay. So I was not a very good public speaker, but mazedar baat ye ki my job is public speaking. I mean, I have to stand in front of you people almost every day or every other day and speak to you. अब जब शुरू में क्लास पढ़ाने एज ए टीचर नया टीचर मैंने टीचिंग शुरू की थी तो मेरे पेट में यूँ करके ना वो होते नहीं क्या कहते हैं उसको नर्वस किस्म की वो चीज़ें होती थी अब जो है ना मुझे पता भी नहीं होता मैं जो कि मैंने क्लास पढ़ानी नहीं पढ़ानी इट्स लाइक सो नेचुरल सो नॉर्मल बिकॉज आफ्टर 18 years of teaching I don't even think about कि हो लोगों के क्या सोचेंगे I'm not even thinking about those things. देखो ना आज मैंने शेव भी नहीं की मैं वैसे ही आ गया हूँ शेव किए बगैर पर भाई कोई नहीं. Not that that's a good thing. A little bit of nervousness is a good thing. But practice makes perfect. Okay? What would you like to be good at?
Me?
Yes. Anything random. I'm not going to hold you to it. Oh, 20 साल बाद आपने तो ये कहा था ये करेंगे. क्यों नहीं किया आपने? It's just random, yeah. What would you like to be good at?
Yes, public speaking too.
Public speaking. How many of you like to be good at public speaking? Okay, very nice. Okay. It's a very useful skill to have. Or what else? What are the other things that you like to be good at? Hobbies, interests? Not what you want, expected, you know, don't say something that you think a teacher will want to hear. Sir, I really want to be good at understanding political philosophy. Don't say that. Tell me this, your interests, your hobbies, what are they? Aap kone mein baithe?
Golf.
Golf? Oh, nice. Okay. I had a friend who was in the Pakistan golf team, Rafi Alam. He also started very early. Gym. Okay. Gym. You can't be good at a gym. You can be good at exercise. You can be, you know. Yes. What would you like to be good at?
Football.
Football. Very nice.
Yeah.
Football. Football. Writing. Lovely. Sports in general. All of them. Where go? Cricket, football.
Squash and tennis.
Squash and tennis. Writing. Very nice.
Fiction writing.
Very, very nice. Gee.
I'd like to write better.
Excellent.
Painting.
Painting. How nice.
Writing.
Writing. A lot of writers here. I'm quite surprised. That's lovely.
Fast bowling.
Fast bowling. He's very specific. He's got focus. I'll give you that. Yeah. It's like fiction writing, not just writing in general. Because writing can be different for different writers. You know, different styles of writing.
Music.
What do you play? Oh, we have to have a performance of the rubab in this class now. You got yourself in trouble. Gee.
Social skills.
Social skills. You know, that is such an intelligent thing to say, actually. People are like, social skills, don't you have any? But, but actually, that's a very intelligent thing to say. You know, we can censor part of this video recording, and that's a very important thing to say. Social skills also require a lot of emotional intelligence, which is very different from, you know, technical intelligence, and I think it really helps. It goes a long way. Public speaking.
So the ability to think critically.
Well, if you wanted one thing that covers it all, it would be the ability to think. This guy is Plato in the making. Squash. Teaching, not the mafia?
No.
Okay, thank you. Teaching, what a lovely thing to say. I'm so happy to hear that, honestly. I used to be the student that used to be the most critical student in class. Who always used to say, "Is bande ko padhana nahi aata." Ye kya padha raha hai? Isko pata hi nahi student se communicate kaise karte hain. And slow, you know, I used to come to class not to learn the subject, but to criticize the teacher's teaching skills. And this happened in class 6 because I read this book. Because in class 6, I flunked Urdu, right? And it was the first time I failed any subject, and I got really upset and depressed, and I cried, etc. Give me a break, I was only 11 years old. And so in my mother's library, I found this book called How Children Fail. I was like, oh, I need to read this book. Why did I fail? So I picked it out. It was by a brilliant educationist called John Holt. And I read the book, very easy book to read. It was a book for teachers. And having read that book, I got really inspired. I was like, this person makes sense to me about how to be a good teacher. You must read that book. And in fact, John Holt is considered an institution. He's influenced teaching worldwide. He's really quite a phenomenal figure. So I thought, so then after having read that book, then I started detecting all the ways in which teachers were teaching incorrectly. And so finally when I graduated, etc., I said, what should I do now? You know what, I'll become a teacher. So that's how my journey went. Gee, what would you like to speak about?
Music production.
Very nice.
Singing.
Singing. You and, what was your name? Mira are going to have a performance together, okay? Football.
Sir, I like a lot of things, so I have summarized two of them. If I get those two things better, I think I will be better in all those.
What are those two
And
things?
those things are communication and cooperation.
Yeah,
And
that's
also
nice.
someone mentioned as social skills. If I
Yeah.
get these three right, I will be better.
Very nice.
I want to learn an instrument because I feel like it's going to be very therapeutic. I don't know how to,
Yeah, it is very therapeutic.
but
It is.
I've always wanted to.
Great, great. Okay, that's quite enough. I'm not interested in you. अगर मैं चलता रहूँगा तो time बहुत निकल जाएगा. So we'll go on. So it's all. So Hobbes is saying you can learn that instrument. You can be good at communication. You can be good at the rubab or social skills or fiction writing or football or cricket or whatever. You cannot just be good at it. Let me tell you, he's saying you can be the best at it. You can be the rubab player or singer or a footballer that you can beat Mr. Messi and Mr. Tidy and all the ones in between. Nobody got that joke. Not even the footballers got that joke. I'm so upset. Okay, you can do that, but you cannot. It's not going to come naturally. You just have to apply yourself. That's what Hobbes is saying. The brain is like an instrument. It's like a muscle that can be developed. The more you exercise it, the more it develops. So now from this equality of ability arises the equality of hope. Everybody can hope to be as good as the other person. If two men desire the same thing, though, they become enemies. If there were two rubab players in this place, then you can be assured that they would be in competition with each other. They would hate each other. So every man look at that his companion should value him at the same rate that he sets upon himself. Right? So I think that I'm the cat's whiskers, and I want you to think that I'm the cat's whiskers. So when you don't come to class, when you don't, write down, when you don't gaze at me like, wow, sir, it's so awesome, when you're like checking your phone, I feel like you're not giving me the value that I'm giving myself, which is up here. So every person desires that. You want that too, right? You want me to think about you in the same flattering, beautiful ways that you think about yourself, right? Whatever that may be. So everybody wants it. Now this sets up conflict, says Thomas Hobbes. And this sets up number one, there's three bases, he says, of this competition, of this conflict. Competition, diffidence, and glory. The first, use violence to make themselves master of other men's persons, wives, children, and cattle. They fight for gain. So one of the reasons that causes war is, I just want to take over your property, I want to take your children, I want to take your cattle, and I want to take your wives, in plural. The second is, of course, they fight to defend themselves, they fight for their safety, right? And the third is for trifles, such as a word, a smile, a different opinion, and any other sign of undervalue. They fight to build a reputation. Don't we do that? Didn't you do that? Come on, boys. Didn't you? Come on, you didn't do that. Don't shake your head. That's not true. I did it. I did it. Yeah, I admit I did it. It was the culture of the time. And did you boys ever, use the expression "very body bag"? Yes, there you go. Thank you. Now you're being more honest with me. So you build a reputation about yourself, and it's very important to Miss Social Skills. If you want to learn this, you want to build a reputation about yourself. So you build a reputation that you're very smart, or that you're very eloquent, or that you're very intelligent, or that you're rough and tough, or that you're a great footballer, or whatever it is. You try to build a reputation about yourself. Sometimes the reputation that is built about you is not the one that you want. To have about you, but you want about yourself. But that's what you try and do, right? So you can have a fight over a reputation. What would offend you?
Sad.
What would really offend? What would really crawl under your skin if somebody said something about you? What would really crawl under your skin and you really want to get that person on their kitchen and say, why did he say this about me?
You called me fat.
Who would call you fat?
So,
Okay, fair enough. Maybe that gets under your skin. It doesn't look like it should get under your skin because there's not much under your skin in the way of fatness. But okay, fair enough. It's a very difficult question to answer. You have to be very honest, right? आप बताएं आप सामने बैठे. What would crawl under your skin? If somebody said, you're giving away your weakness because now if you're going to go and Saad, you're going to be going down the hall and somebody's going to say, hey, fatty. Are you well, fatty? This is going to tease you, you know that, right? But still, what would crawl under your skin?
Jahil.
Sure, okay, yeah. Stupid or jahil or mote or badsurat or, insincere or disloyal or, these things would hurt you, right? And yeah, choro, corrupt or, I'm sure Nawaz Sharif is quite upset, but maybe not, he's quite thick-skinned. Imran Khan would probably be very upset if you said, you're a serial monogamist or something. Watch out, Pinky. Right, so Imran would probably get really upset and be like, don't you dare say anything about my love life or whatever. Right? And so people may fight to protect their reputation. That happens all the time. Now, if there was no control, if there was no authority sitting on top of you, if there was no Sir Taimur Rahman telling you, beta, ye nahi karna, so phir what would happen? There would be a war of all against all. Everybody would just be fighting with each other. Ever seen a classroom? What happens to a classroom when the teacher leaves? Especially if you're at the school level. College mein to aap, you all pretend to be very well behaved. We're so civilized and so on. But have you ever seen a classroom, like a school classroom, and what happens when the teacher leaves? Huh?
They start like,
Oh my God, they go crazy. सब बैठे होते हैं बच्चे यूं करके जैसे टीचर पागल हो जाते हैं चीजें फेंकना शुरू कर देते हैं शोर मचाना शुरू कर देते हैं crazy हो जाते हैं. So in much the same way, God, my arms are so. I should have warmed up before doing that. In much the same way, he's saying in society where there is no state, there is no social control, without authority, there will be war of every man against every man. And in such risk and uncertainty, there would be no development. I mean, if you're trying to build something, you're trying to build these blocks and some kid comes and just, kicks the blocks, etc. You wouldn't even try to build the blocks next time because there would be so much uncertainty and chaos. You wouldn't be taking notes, you wouldn't be studying, you couldn't read, you couldn't do anything constructive because there would be so much chaos. And here I'm making a bit of a joke out of it, but he's actually talking about real chaos where people are slitting each other's throats. They're killing each other. There can only be continual fear and danger of violent death. The life of man will become, he says, and this is one of his most famous quotes, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. It would be a horrible life. It would be lonely. It would be a poor life, not just in terms of riches, but in terms of, not just in terms of wealth, but in terms of, culture and civilization. It would be nasty. It would be terrible. So, from this generates universal distrust. अच्छा आप कहते हैं कि सर ये तो बड़ा pessimistic view है ना? आपका क्या नाम है? Fatma, this is a very pessimistic view. You seem like a very nice person, who likes to believe in humanity. This is a very anti sort of how should I put it? Good view of humanity. Do you think this is right? He can't be right. How many of you think that can't be right? Humanity is so cutthroat and horrible. Raise your hands. If you believe humanity is much nicer like Fatma believes. Wow, a lot of cynical people here. Okay. But Hobbes says, Fatma, आप मुझे ना इस बारे में, don't blame me for having such a negative view of humanity. What opinion does he have of his fellow subjects when he locks his doors? And of his children and servants when he locks his chest? Does he not there as much accuse mankind by his actions as I do by my words? आप खुद अपनी गाड़ी लॉक करते हैं ना, आप खुद अपनी अलमारी लॉक करते हैं ना, आप अपने पैसे छुपाते हैं ना, अपना फोन छुपाते हैं ना, कोई चोरी ना कर ले वगैरह वगैरह. So what is that saying about the world? It's saying that you know in your mind that man is like that. By nature, man is not, by man I mean women as well. Humanity is is like that. They will kill each other over a phone if need be. Karachi mein, how many from Karachi? Okay. So in Karachi, I hope you've never had to personally experience this sort of new trend of mugging for phones. Kabhi
It's not new.
aapke sath nahi hua?
It's not new though.
It's not new, yeah. For you it's not new, for me it's new. I'm a bit older. What happens? Tell us.
Nothing happens. You're just going along the road. A motorcycle with those of us. One of them puts up a gun. You give your phone and then you go.
Right. It's become so normal. You know, लाहौर में टक 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 कोई बंदा आके गाड़ी पे टक 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 करता है बाजी 5 रुपये दे दो ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ दुआ करांगे कराची में बंदा टक टक करता है इसी टक टक हाथ से नहीं करा बंदूक से कर रहा है आप देखते हैं वो कहते हैं व्हाट फोन लो दे क्या फिर वो पान की थूकता है फोन दे दे फिर आप फोन देते हैं मेरा कजन जो था he was driving along with his dad he stopped at an interchange somebody came tuck 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 said phone nikalo so he gave his phone he took his wallet etc like oh god this is terrible they went to the next chalk somebody else came tuck 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 phone de do they're like sorry पिछले चौक पे किसी ने चोरी कर लिया मैं आपसे झूठ नहीं बोल रहा कसम से पिछले चौक पे किसी ने चोरी कर लिया अभी पिछले चौक पे कहता अच्छा oh sorry चले ठीक है it's become so normal in Karachi it's incredible anyway so that's the kind of place we live in says Karachi is proving Thomas Hobbes correct so and what about the state kings and persons of sovereign authority are in continuous jealousies they're all the time competing with each other you know for power and jealous of each other इमरान खान का जुलूस इतना बड़ा था मैं इससे बड़ा जुलूस करूंगा वो तरीके लब्बैक वाला कहता है कि हमारा धरना जो है उसको कंपेयर नहीं किया जा सकता पीटीआई के धरने के साथ and then of course he follows that with about 50 Punjabi words that I cannot repeat in this classroom अच्छा अगर आपको ये लगता है कि ये बड़ी unjust बात है फातिमा it's not actually unjust in the state of nature if we become like Karachi sorry Karachiites I don't know why I'm picking on you Lahore में भी बड़ी problems हैं ऐसी कोई बात नहीं है but in the state of nature you can't really say that the person who has taken something from you is doing something unjust because justice itself can only be established once you have law once you have said कि ये चीज़ नहीं करनी ये चीज़ करनी है right so if you don't have law if you don't have the state then nothing is unjust you can do anything you want right because we haven't established as a society what is right and wrong what is allowed and not allowed in the state of nature there are no agreed upon rules so everything is just or rather nothing is unjust and nothing is just because the distinction has not yet come about that distinction only comes about by another process which we'll cover in just a bit so in this war of every man against every man nothing can be unjust the notions of right and wrong justice and justice have there no place where there is no common power there is no law where no law no injustice force and fraud are in war the two cardinal virtues so you can force somebody you can defraud somebody that's just how things work in the state of nature we haven't established amongst ourselves any rules but men are also inclined to peace out of fear of death this is the key now if this was the case in the state of nature then man would never make a state never make laws how is it Mr. Thomas Hobbes then that man makes laws well he says there is a contradiction the contradiction is between natural right and natural laws what's the contradiction by right we want liberty so please write that down right for Hobbes liberty is our right to do whatever we want even if that means grabbing this guy by the throat and saying give me that pencil you know even something small and minor like that is my right everything I want to do is my right he says but there is also something else that we desire which is very very strong and that's a natural tendency in us it's a natural law in us and that is the law of self-preservation everybody wants to live right you don't want somebody else to come and take your life and so on so liberty is the absence of any external impediments every man has a right to do everything and the law of nature is that man is forbidden to do that which is destructive of his own life. You don't want to do things. You may inadvertently do things that are destructive of your own life, but that's not something you want to do. So right consists in liberty to do or to forbear, whereas law determines and binds. So right is like expansive, you know, the right to do whatever I want, and law is restrictive. It sort of says, no, we're talking about natural law here. It says, do not do anything that endangers you, that puts you into peril. So, whereas law determines and binds, so that law and right differ as much as obligation and liberty. So there's a contradiction. By natural right, I want to do whatever, but by natural law, I also want my self-preservation. So, if we get into a situation where everybody's killing everybody else, after a certain point, some of us are going to say, यार क्या हो रहा है? मतलब हम 20 साल 25 साल की उम्र में हम मारे जाते हैं क्योंकि हम एक दूसरे से लड़ रहे हैं, and this is really bad for us. So let's find a way. Let's find a way. Our self-preservation basically forces us to find a way to come to some agreement where our life could be better, where our life could be longer. So every man ought to endeavor for peace as far as he has hope of obtaining it. And when he cannot obtain it, that he must seek and use all help and advantages of all. A man be willing when others are so too, as far forth as for peace and defense of himself, he shall think it necessary to lay down his right to all things, and be contended with so much liberty against other men as he would allow other men against himself. Yani ki, okay, because I want to live a good life, I don't want to die, let's come to an agreement. Okay? I won't infringe on your law, on your right, you don't infringe on mine. I give up my right to come and grab your gitchi and say, give me your pencil. In exchange, you also have to reciprocally give up your right to come and grab my gitchi and say, phone de de ya pencil de de ya pencil de de. Okay? So, man therefore, out of a desire for self-preservation, begins to reach an accommodation and an understanding. Voluntarily, in fact, gives up the right to do whatever the hell I want, to do whatever the hell he wants or she wants, in exchange for what? Security, in exchange for a longer life, in exchange for self-preservation. And this is the beginning of a social contract, says Thomas Hobbes. Now, social contract theory is extremely important because the notion of social contract dominates politics today. Right? It completely dominates. Gone are the times where you believed that kings were divine creatures, etc., and they could do whatever the hell they wanted to. Today, everybody is of the view, it's the dominant view in society, that citizens and the state have a contract. The citizen has to give up certain things, certain rights, has to pay taxes, and so on and so forth, obey certain laws, and the state also has to do something for citizens in order to enjoy legitimacy and so on. So it's a contract between state and society. But first we have to understand that the state is created out of a contract within society. We are reaching a contract with each other, which leads to the formation of a state. So right is laid aside either by simply renouncing it or by transferring it to another. I give up my right to do whatever the hell I please in exchange for some security, a longer life. Whenever a man transfers his right, it is either in consideration of some right reciprocally transferred to himself. I am giving up my right, you also give up your right. So we come to an agreement. Or for some other good he hopes for thereby. For it is a voluntary act. And of the voluntary acts of every man, the object is some good to himself. The mutual transferring of rights is that which men call a contract. So in a contract, what do? We say, okay, I give you this, you give me that. I'll give you my phone, you give me 10,000. No phone is worth 10,000 rupees these days. Anyway, actually, Q mobile is, sorry. I give you this, you give me that, right? So it's a trade-off. Okay. What are we giving each other? I'm saying, I won't murder you, please don't murder me. Okay. We're going to make certain laws. We're going to make laws like, you're not going to murder me, I'm not going to murder you, and so on. I'm not going to steal from you, you don't steal from me. I'm not going to take something from you by force. I'm not going to take something from you by fraud. Let's make these laws, and then we'll all be happy and live better lives. But how is this possible? I mean, people will break the contract. I mean, so let's say I make a contract that you don't take things from me, and I don't take things from you, Saad. But Saad may be tempted. He might find that I'm walking along some dark alleyway of lumps, and he might say, oh, nobody's watching right now. I can break the contract easily and take Sir Taimur-e-Man's telephone or whatever the case may be. So what's going to make that contract binding? Because people can be fickle. So he says no contract is going to be binding without the sword. कोई ऊपर तलवार लटक रही होगी तो फिर वो contract वाकई binding होगा. डंडा जब तक होगा ना तो उस वक्त तक contract जो है ना उसकी कोई strength नहीं होगी. To make a social contract binding, one needs a common power. The only way to erect such a common power is to confer all their power and strength upon one man or upon one assembly of men that may reduce all their wills by plurality, all their wills by plurality of voices onto one will. So what we can do is, we have to have a power that stands over society and will enforce that contract. So when we all agree कि हम एक दूसरे को नहीं कत्ल करेंगे, then we have to give somebody the power to enforce that contract, to make sure that we are all held to account. And that person or that assembly of people is what Hobbes refers to as the Leviathan. Leviathan is this huge monster, biblical monster, right? This Leviathan is made up of our own social contract. We are going to come to agree that we are going to give one person or an assembly of people this enormous power to enforce that which we have mutually agreed. I authorize and give up my right of governing myself to this man or to this assembly of men on this condition that thou give up that right to him and authorize all his actions in like manner. This is the generation of that great Leviathan, or rather to speak more reverently, of that mortal God to which we owe under the immortal God our peace and defense. So it's like there's God up in the heaven, and then there's the power of the state, which is the most powerful thing that could exist over here. It's like the mortal God. One person of whose acts a great multitude by mutual covenants, one with another have made themselves everyone the author, to the end he may use the strength and means of them all as he shall think expedient for their peace and common defense. So you are going to give me the power to enforce that which we have mutually agreed, not to kill each other and so on. It's by your consent that I have that power. You gave me that power of that totalitarian power to rule you, to ridicule you, to make fun of Karachi, to make fun of you in general. You gave me that power. Why? Because you wanted me to maintain that discipline. Why? Because you wanted to study, because you wanted to be productive. And if there was nobody controlling the class, then there would be chaos and you wouldn't be able to study. In the same way, in society, if there wasn't a state that was controlling people, society would not be able to develop because we'd all just be bloody killing each other.
So instead of putting the same idea in such depressive terms like totalitarianism, can't the same idea be justified as the state having a parental role?
It's a very good question. I think the difference between what Hobbes is saying and the state just as a parent, because in ancient times, oftentimes the monarch, etc., would be referred to as the father figure and so on, right? But the difference here is between Hobbes and just any state that has a lot of power for divine reasons or because it is your parent or whatnot, is that this is not something that's given by God. This is not something that's given by blood. It is not something that's given by some quality that the sovereign has. It is something that is agreed upon by us, by society.
But then the entire debate of the area of neutrality and parental role stems from the very same idea as the parental role.
Not necessarily, because the ancient idea of the parental role stems from really tribes joining together, and then the head of the tribe being really the parent, actually the patriarch of the tribe itself, and then from there it evolved when these tribes evolved into a state, and the head of state that was really the patriarch of that state. So that's how historically you got the idea of the head of state being, a father figure. So that was something that came out of this idea of patrilineal heritage and bloodlines. So there is a commonality between what Hobbes is saying and what that ancient theory was saying, which is that the state shall have this power over its children. But the difference is that in the case of a parent and child, that is not a power that the parent has over the children because the children have agreed to give that power to the parent. It is rather a power that the parent enjoys because the parent is a parent. He's the senior, he's the vadera of the clan, he's the what's another word? He's a father figure. He literally was the father figure in the biological sense at one time, and now he's the metaphorical father figure. So that really is still very tied to the idea of inequality between people, that the ruler is like an adult, and the children and those who follow him are like children, right? They're intellectually at a lowest level. But Hobbes is not saying that, remember. He's saying everybody's equal here. We have agreed by consent to give up our power to make somebody have the power that a parent does. Now, as for your other question about the use of the word totalitarian, Hobbes doesn't use that term. Nobody in Hobbes' time used that term. It's a very 20th century term. And, but we can use the term absolutist power, absolute power, which is similar, though not identical with totalitarianism. Okay, so to go on. So this is the generation of that great Leviathan, or rather to speak more reverently, okay, so what we're going to do is, we're going to give Sir Taimur Rahman this big stick, this big danda, and he is going to use that danda. We are going to give him the danda, and we're also going to give him the right to use that danda to discipline us. Okay? It's like us saying, okay, you know, these three guys are, we believe in them, so we are going to give them weapons. We're going to give them sticks and make sure that everybody makes a line. But it's something that we have agreed to. It's a power that we have agreed to give them. Yes.
But what stops them from killing us?
आते हैं उस पे, आते हैं. पहले इसको समझ लेना, उस पे भी आते हैं. What are the rights of the sovereign? First, let's get to what powers do we want to give them, says Hobbes. Well, the people cannot make a new car. That means once we have given them the power, we can't say, okay, I don't really like the way they're working, I'm going to find somebody else to give the same power to. You can't break that covenant once you've made it. There can happen no breach of covenant on the part of the sovereign. What? In other words, once you have given the sovereign that power, the sovereign cannot breach it. It's just not, for him, deductively possible even. And consequently, none of his subjects, by any pretense of forfeiture, can be freed from his subjection. So you cannot say, okay, you know, the sovereign has broken the covenant, I don't want this state, I want another state. You can't rebel against the state at all, according to Hobbes. Well, he makes some exceptions, and we'll have that at the end. He that dissented must also now consent with the rest. हो सकता है कि आपने कहोगे नहीं, मैंने नहीं सर तैमूर रहमान को हेड बनाना, या मैंने हेड बनाना ही नहीं है. But now that society has agreed as a whole to making a covenant, even if you disagree, you have to obey the sovereign. Since every man is the author of that sovereign, the actions of the latter can do no injury to any of his subjects. You created the sovereign. You created me. So now you can't complain कि सर ने मेरे marks जो है गलत काटे हैं, या सर ने मुझे गलत humiliate किया है. You gave me the power. You are the author of your own humiliation, so to speak, says Hobbes. This is pretty. आपका क्या नाम था? Sorry? Zulnash. Is that Iranian or is that an Iranian name? Persian, yeah, obviously. Yes, thank you for correcting me. So Zulnash, now that the sovereign can do no injury at all, we cannot even conceive of that. And because you gave me the power, you are the author of whatever I do to you. समझ गए? Even if I put you to death, you can never put me to death. You can never say कि Charles I, हमारा गिट्टा उतार देंगे यार, Louis XVI, in the guillotine you go. No. The sovereign shall be the sole judge of what opinions and doctrines are averse and what conducive to peace. I will judge what is good and bad, what the state must do, what society must do. You give me that power, and once you give me that power, then I will determine कि हम इंडिया के साथ peace करेंगे, अफगानिस्तान के साथ जंग करेंगे, ईरान उनकी इतनी खूबसूरत ज़बान है कि उनसे तो सारी बातें हम जंग नहीं कर सकते. मगर जो भी है, जो भी फैसला करेंगे, अब वो मैं करूँगा. उसके बाद आपका उसमें कोई आपके पास ये हक नहीं कि आप ये कहें कि भाई मैंने नहीं इस फैसले को मानना है, कबूल करना. And even right and wrong, I will judge. The sovereign shall make all the rules and laws. I'll make the laws. I like this guy, Hobbes, as you can tell. You know, this is really what we should apply in classrooms. Don't you agree? The sovereign has the right to judicature. यानी कि sovereign ही जो है, वो is the judge, jury, and executioner. The sovereign has the right to make war and peace. The sovereign has the right to reward and punish any citizen. I will give the medal for who is the best student and who is the worst student. You will have no input in this at all. I mean, you can have an input in it, but the decision belongs to me. You can tell me, sir, मेरा ख्याल है इसको medal मिलना चाहिए. But it's my decision and you have to obey it. The sovereign makes all the laws of honor and award titles of honor, etc. as well. So you can see that Hobbes really is, and really gives a huge amount of power to the state. Almost no checks, you can see almost no checks and balances here. You don't see, basically the people with their consent make the Leviathan, but once they make the Leviathan, then they have forfeited all right to rebellion and control over that Leviathan. Then the Leviathan will take the decision. But Saad's question remains, why does he give the Leviathan so much power? He says the kingdom divided on itself cannot stand. The power and the honor of the sovereign must be greater than of any or all the subjects. My power must be greater than all of your power. Because otherwise, how am I going to enforce the law? If you're going to continuously challenge me all the time, every decision I take, you're going to say, "Nahi sir, ye nahi theek. Nahi sir, abhi nahi class karni hai. Nahi sir, ye nahi karna, wo nahi karna." Phir to kuch bhi nahi hoga na, we'll be back to square one. As in the presence of the master, the servants are equal and without any honor, so are the subjects in the presence of the sovereign. I like this guy. He says, no, I don't actually, but he says, you are to me as slaves are to a master. You are as subjects to the state as slaves are to a master. You are without honor, without any right of opinion. A man may object to the conditions of the conditions of subject, that the conditions of subject is very miserable. You might say, sir, ye to aapne bahut hi mushkil condition laga di. But they are less miserable and horrible than the calamities that accompany a civil war. Ye aapko buri lagi cheezein? Civil war dekho, usme kya satyanas hota hai. The greatest pressure of sovereign governors proceeds not from any delight or profit they can expect in the damage or weakening of the subjects in whose vigor consists their own strength and glory. So Saad, that answers your question. I'm not going to abuse my power, maybe I'll abuse it slightly or whatnot, but at the end of the day, overall, my strength is going to be built by your strength. So I don't want to take a decision that decreases your strength, because as a sovereign, I will be a powerful sovereign if my society is strong. So I am going to try and make you strong so that I become strong, so that then I can also compete with other states, etc., etc. So I'm not going to take any decision that is going to weaken society as a whole. And even if I do, I'll probably correct it very quickly, because my interests lie in the strength and glory of my state. And the strength and glory of my state is dependent on the strength, productivity of my people. That's why I won't do bad things. Now, you may say, sir, हमारी सारी liberty आपने छीन ली है, और एक ऐसा state बनाया, we will be living in fear of that state. But fear and liberty are consistent, he says. Fear is not necessarily a bad thing. It can, in fact, create more liberty than you have given up. All actions which men do in commonwealths for fear of the law are actions which the doer had liberty to omit. You yourself took the decision not to do those things. It follows that in all kinds of actions permitted by the law, men have the liberty of doing what their own reasons shall suggest for the most profitable to themselves. Anything, your liberty continues to exist, where जहाँ पे law मैंने बना लिया है, उसको तो आप contravene नहीं कर सकते. मगर उसके अलावा आपको complete liberty है जो मर्जी आप करें. अगर law is the only thing that is going to constrain your actions. Aside from that, Hobbes is saying you can do anything. The liberty of the subject lies, therefore, only in those things which in regulating their actions the sovereign has permitted. So, your liberty is going to be now limited by the law which the sovereign is going to create. And this, he says, is a good thing, because it's going to mean that you're going to be more productive in life, you're going to be safer in life. You're trading, the classical phrase is, please write this down, what Hobbes is suggesting to you is, you are trading liberty for what? Security. Absolutely. Liberty for security. If you wanted to sum up Hobbes in 3 words, you are trading liberty for security. Sorry, that's 4 words. Yes, Father.
So the entire premise of this argument, I mean, as problematic as the argument is, the premise of it just sounds unreal to me. The idea that what comes naturally to human existence is this state of equality. So for example, it's like the classic economics problem that there is perfect competition, your point of reference, but except for the fact perfect competition doesn't exist. Similarly, this is not a utopian world that he has created. He has created an entirely dystopian world where he argues that equality is the premise of everything that happens next, when that's not true. You spoke about a paternal relationship. If I want to murder my sibling in the state of nature because everyone is equal and that is what is allowing me to exercise self-interest, fact of the matter is that my parents will stop me because naturally there are hierarchies. There's no such thing as being equal. So, and we say patriarchy is the oldest ideology. Then saying that, we're saying that there was a time where men and women were equal, but then patriarchy did come into being. Some hunter and gatherer decided that women are weak to defend the food they gather, so like men are better than women. We created religion to maintain certain hierarchies and to correct this inclination of pursuit of self-interest. So I'm not saying we're not self-interested by design or we don't have this inclination to be selfish. It's just that naturally the state of nature is that we do come up with mechanisms and there are hierarchies that stop that very thing to culminate. We don't need to create a leviathan.
I think you're making a superb point. But I think perhaps the way Hobbes would respond is, first of all, he would argue that he's not talking about a state of nature as a period of history. He is not talking about hunter-gatherer societies in particular. He is talking about any society. A state of nature is much more of a theoretical abstraction. Any society, any time in history that does not have a state will descend into chaos, is what he's saying, or does not have a hierarchy. So what you're pointing out, Hobbes would say, that to the degree that there was a hierarchy in the hunter-gatherer period, the hunter-gatherer period managed to become, to transform itself into a better period or into a more advanced society, i.e. agricultural revolution. And by the way, the beginning of patriarchy, most people think, anthropologists think, begins not with the hunter-gatherer society, but with agriculture. So to the extent that hunter-gatherer societies had a hierarchy, they were able to constrain, just as you said, my parent will stop me from killing my sibling. To the extent that there was a hierarchy, there was a leviathan inside the family, made life better for the children. To that same extent, Hobbes is saying that if you build such a hierarchy or such an authority in contemporary society, you will be better off. So what Hobbes is saying is, everything you're saying is proving him right rather than proving him wrong. Because you yourself pointed out how it was hierarchy that prevented the mutual murder of two siblings. Right? That's how you began. So that's what he's saying. To prevent the mutual slaughter of society, you need not only a hierarchy, you need a parental authority that can just stop two children and say, "Oye, bas karo." Itni strong authority. So those two points are the response.
The argument is that the state of nature is then hierarchical. It's not equality based on equality.
Again, so the answer to that is that what you're pointing out to is a hunter-gatherer society, and you're equating that with the state of nature, right?
For any society in history, was there a society that was based on the premise of equality? I think what comes naturally to us is hierarchies. It's not a conscious social design that we have to agree for a contract and make a leviathan. It's what we do naturally.
Okay, but let's say I gave you that, but what Hobbes is trying to say is something a little different. You're pointing to an actually existing society and saying that it proves that Hobbes' state of nature cannot exist. So Hobbes could respond by saying that my framework is a theoretical one. It's not a historical one. It's not like first we were in a state of nature, then we became a hunter-gatherer society, then we did. That's not what Hobbes is saying. Hobbes is just saying, imagine a society without hierarchy and authority. What would happen? Everybody would kill each other. Okay? Even if you were to prove that no such society has ever existed without hierarchy and authority, the theoretical abstraction can still exist. That if there was a society without any hierarchy and authority, would we start killing each other? If you accept that logic, then you accept the other side of Hobbes, that there must be some hierarchy, some authority, in order for us to lead a better life. So in that sense, you are still being very Hobbesian. You're not escaping Hobbes. But actually I agree with you, but today I have to defend Hobbes. But I think if you were to critique Hobbes, you could argue the position that Hobbes' theoretical experiment or abstraction has never actually really ever existed and could never actually ever exist, and that's not how history evolved. But still Hobbes could stand on his own ground and say, well, it's just a theoretical abstraction. Just imagine a thought experiment. Yes.
The fact that such a society never existed, doesn't it prove Hobbes that always people come up to this conclusion that there should be a power? So that's why a society where there are no hierarchies doesn't exist.
Excellent question again. So it still doesn't matter for Hobbes that no such society, even if you were to prove that no such society exists, he could simply argue, well, you can have a scale, right? You can have a scale of society in which there is a very strong authority, a state which is very, very strong, and you can have societies where states are very, very weak. So you have strong states. If you give me an example of a strong state, United States of America is an extremely strong state, right? Saudi Arabia is a very strong absolutist state. And you can have a society we can have a state which is very, very weak. So Central African Republic has a very weak state. So if you have a weak state, are you more likely to have a civil war? And if you have a strong state, you're less likely to have a civil war. So you don't have to operate in the absolute terms and say pure state of nature and pure authority. But you can also look at it on a sliding scale and say, well, if we move from a strong state to a weak state, are we more likely to be in a civil war? If the answer is yes, well then you're proving Hobbes right. Then you're saying, well, the state needs to be strong in order to prevent civil war. And that's what Hobbes is up to, right? Questions? More questions? The other problem, Fatma, aapka kya naam tha? Naseer, that both of you have is that you have read too many Greek and Latin. You've been influenced by too many Greek and Latin authors, says Hobbes. By reading of these Greek and Latin authors, men from their childhood have gotten a habit, under a false show of liberty, of favoring tumults and of licentious controlling the actions of their sovereign, and again of controlling those controllers with the effusion of so much blood, as I think I may truly say there was never anything so dearly bought as these Western parts have brought the learning of the Greek and Latin tongues. हमने ग्रीक और लैटिन टंग सीख के बड़े अपने साथ ज्यादती की. क्यों ज्यादती की? बिकॉज अब हमें आदत पड़ गई इस चीज की कि बार बार चेक्स एंड बैलेंसेस, डेमोक्रेसी, इनको पकड़ो, इनसे पूछो, इनसे सवाल करो, ये करो, और इसका बड़ा नुकसान है. In the act of submission consists both our obligation and our liberty. If you submit to the sovereign, that will actually give you a better life, says Hobbes. But Hobbes is not going to be so cruel. There's also some parts where he says, okay, I concede. अभी तक तो उसने ये कहा कि कोई रिबेल कर ही नहीं सकता. अब वो कहता है कि okay, I can see that there will be one contradiction. The contradiction is that right in the beginning he said that it is a law of nature, self-preservation is a law of nature. अपनी जिंदगी बचाना जो है, ये आपका एक right है by the law of nature. So no man can be organized by covenant to accuse himself. So defending your right to life is a right that the covenant cannot take away from you. So if there can be no law that makes you accuse yourself. You still have the right to defend your life. You still have the right to come and say, I am not guilty. When therefore a refusal to obey frustrates the end for which the sovereign was ordained, then there is no liberty to refuse. Otherwise there is. For instance, the timid should not be forced into war if they can be substituted, if they can substitute another soldier in their part, in their place. So if I'm not a good soldier and I say, sir, मैं क्या लड़ूंगा मैदान जंग में, इसको लेके जाएं, ये जरा healthy किस्म का बंदा है, ये जरा बेहतर लड़ेगा, तो this can be excused because I should have the right to preserve my life and argue the case for the preservation of my life. Similarly, the obligation of subjects to the sovereign is understood to last as long and no longer than the power lasts by which he is able to protect them. So I gave up all my rights almost so that the state would protect me, right? Now what if the state is not protecting me? For the right men have by nature to protect themselves when none else can protect them can by no covenant be relinquished. I did not give up my right to protect myself. I gave you the power to protect me. Now if you don't protect me, if you start killing me, as a people, then, the reason I gave up my right to all my rights has been contradicted. The end of obedience, he says, therefore, is protection. If the state is unable to protect you, to protect a people, not just one individual, but if it is unable to protect a people, unable to provide that security to the people for which we gave up all our rights, then we are no longer obligated to obey that state. So it has to be it's a very extreme condition. कि literally अगर civil war हो जाए, state आपकी ज़िंदगी protect ना कर सके, आपके ऊपर कोई और कुव्वत आके आपको conquer कर जाए, then you no longer owe your obligation to that state, etc. If a man be held in prison also, if you're held in prison, he cannot be understood to be bound by the covenant to subjection, and therefore if he can make his escape by any means whatsoever. Even a prisoner has a right to self-preservation. So if a prisoner can run away to save his life, prisoner of war or whatever taken by the state, I can't blame him, because self-preservation is a right that no covenant can take from you. Let me finish. If a monarch subdued by war renders himself subject to the victor, his subjects are delivered from their former obligations and become obliged to the victor. So if your monarch is defeated by another king, then your covenant with the defeated monarch is finished. Your covenant with the victor may begin.
So is the second last point saying that a prison break can be legal?
It's not legal. It's not legal, but you can't take away somebody's right to try and live by law, right? Because it contradicts one of the most important natural laws of man, which is self-preservation. I mean, you go and get that prisoner, you run after him, you capture him again. But what Hobbes is trying to say is, that's understandable. It's completely understandable that they're trying to save his life. You expect him not to try and save his life? How is that going to happen? Yes.
Sir,